Rev Mason, platform is yours.
Yes. A pleasant good night to each and everyone. I will start out with John chapter 20, verse 30, 31. And many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that he might believe in that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing he might have life through his name. Now, the reason why I start off with that because when I finish, everything will be tied into to understand why I started off with John 20. Now, the topic tonight is the gospel. What is the gospel? And these points is what I will be expounding on. What is the gospel? Who wrote the gospel? And why the gospel was written? And who the gospel was targeting? Now we will start with what is the gospel? The gospel are not biographies in a modern sense of the word, rather they are stories told in such a way as to evoke a certain image of Jesus for a particular audience. They are trying to convey a message about Jesus, about his significance to the audience, and thus we have to think of them as a kind of preaching as well as storytelling. That's what the gospel, the good news, is really all about. The four gospels that we find in the New Testament are, of course, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The first three of these are usually referred to as the synoptic gospel because they look at the things in a similar way or they are similar in the way that they tell the story of these. Then Mark is the earliest, probably written between 70 and 75. Matthew is next written somewhere between 75 and about 85, maybe even a little later than that. Luke is a little later, still being written between 80 and maybe 90 or 95. And John's Gospel is the latest, usually dated around 95, although it may be completed slightly later than that. Who wrote the Gospel? The Christian tradition. The four evangelists are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The author attributes with the creation of the four canonical gospel accounts. In the New Testament, they bear the following title: the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke, and the Gospel of John. Most scholars agree that they are work of the unknown Christians and were composed 68 to 110 AD. The majority of the New Testament scholars also agree that the Gospel do not contain eyewitness accounts, but they present the theologies of their communities rather than the testimony of the eyewitness. Just now, okay. Why the gospel was written? These stories were shaped by the purpose for their telling to inspire belief. The critical beginning was expanded with material about the life and teachings of Jesus, which a reverence for and a preoccupation with the holy figure of Jesus, demanding out of a loving curiosity about him, about his earthly ministry and life. Each gospel was written with a different perspective to a different audience. They each look at the character of Jesus from different angles, which is true because no two persons would be able to give our account the same way. It must differ a little. The target audience. Who was the target audience of the Gospel of John? It will be argued that John did not only focus on specific group of people, but had a wide variety of people. That is Jews, Hellenistic, Samaritan. Samaritans in mind, which leads to the conclusion that the fourth gospel was written with both evangelistic and dedicated aim. And the Greek word for evangelist is evangeline. It means good news. Mark explanation, Mark audience. Who was the audience of the Gospel of Mark? Mark explanation of Jewish custom and his translation of Aramaic expression suggests that he was writing for the Gentile converts, probably especially for those converts living in Rome. To continue, the aim to who was the gospel aim at? The seeks to tell the story of Jesus Christ to a distinctly Jewish audience. Matthew's purpose in writing the gospel is convince devout and dedicated first century Palestinians, Jews, that Jesus is the promised Messiah of God. When Luke's gospel was written to Theophilus. Luke intended his gospel to be read primarily by Gentile audience, and he presented Jesus Christ as a savior of both Jews and Gentiles. Luke specifically addresses his gospel to Theophilus. Luke 1:3. Somebody can get Luke 1:3 for me and hold on to it, which in the Greek means friend of God or beloved of God. Right? That is the meaning of Theophilus. The main message of the four gospels. It is written to show the miracles of Jesus so that those who read his story will believe in him and have everlasting life. But that's how John 20:30-31 came in. John's account of Jesus' teaching and miracle emphasized the divine nature of Jesus Christ, that who believe in him will have everlasting life. That is so true. Like John 3:16. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son. And we know that by heart by now. Okay. A little extra to add on. As we say, each of the different gospel was written for thing. Mark was really the first gospel to be written. Even though it come Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but Mark was really the first gospel that was first to be written. And then the others came down. And earlier you saw how that was paraphrased. Luke 1:3. What Luke 1:3 says? Anybody got it?
Yeah, it seems good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things for the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus or Theophilus.
Right. Because Luke had written his thing to Theophilus, as I said. But if you go through the four gospels, if it take at least a chapter or a verse or something about Jesus, in each of the gospels on them, it is written different. Even though it's the same thing that went on, but each one is written differently. So that each of them put across their words different, but with the same meaning. Now, Matthew was the apostle, and Mark, Luke, and John, they all were the evangelists. So the only apostle really there was Matthew, because Matthew was one of his disciples, as I think, as far as I understand. So this ends my little.
Already?
Yeah.
Right.
I stick more to the the facts. Otherwise, it would have been much longer than this.
All right. All right, so I am just trying to get some of my notes here together.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so anybody have any questions? Anything to ask Sister Liz? Even
Before you do that, how you stop sharing this screen?
go to the top of the screen.
Oh, I see it.
Right, stop share. All right, I'll leave the question things out and I'll stop recording from this point on.
Yeah.
Right? I stop recording.